that's a criminal offence. But now if you do that, it's a criminal offence, right? If you do that, it's a criminal offence. And you think that's right.
I think it's wrong to hit another person.
Yeah, I know, but do you think you should criminalise?
If I did that to any of you...
I know, but I'm not a child.
It's wrong.
I'm not a child. Can you not distinguish
But
between an adult and a child?
Like any other. This, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. You kept talking about socialising them into our world. Yeah, it's their world too. It's not owned by the bloody adults.
Okay. All right. That's,
no, it's not.
No, that's really useful. Thank you so much. Back there and then over here. Yeah?
Can I just make an anecdotal comment? So I grew up in East Africa, and I think there was always a stage in children's development when we kind of learned the art of negotiation by the way our elders treated us. So in the front courtyard, the home where I grew up, there was a mango tree, and our grandmother often used to hit us, or to smack us when we'd done wrong. But as we got older, we'd run and climb this tree, and when she needed us to do something, we'd say, well, come down and do it if you're going to not punish us for the thing that we did wrong. So I think one of the points I'm trying to make is I think reasonable chastisement can have an important social developmental role to play for a child as they grow up. And that's just...
Sorry, I think I should return to my last question regarding what would you propose instead of like physical chastisement or
alternatives. Okay. Any other? Okay, so I'm not sure that we'll have time to go back out, so I want you to thinking about the discussion as a whole and picking up on anything that hasn't been sort of addressed. So it's the principle that it's just wrong. Or it's part of the development, and it's something that happens in many different countries and cultures. I know for Indigenous Canadians, for instance, parenting through fear is a pretty common thing. Like anthropologically, fear was something that people used. The norm of emotional development or emotional attachment to the child is actually something that's quite rare, at least in those cultures. So anything or ethical, moral issues. So just 2 or 3 points to finish up. Anyone who wants to go first, jump in.
Yeah, you see, I don't think I'm entirely right. And people are different, and different people have got a different reason for their thoughts about things. But my concern is that what appears to be a concern about children, right, that you're really caring about children, is more a reflection of that you fear adults, or you have a degraded view of adults. But on top of that, I also think there's an element, especially when you read the material on this, where there's actually a degraded view of children as well, because one of the arguments is that if you smack children, it creates the violence of tomorrow. And it's it's so simplistic, in a sense. This idea, you smack a child, you're teaching them to smack. Well, that child was smacked when she was going to kick the mother, but suddenly she didn't keep kicking the mother more, right? And you can give all sorts of examples where that's the case. I got the cane, and I'm not justifying the use of the cane. I got the cane when I was 6 years old for cutting a good little bit off a girl's hair. I thought it was excessive to get the cane for that, but I got the cane. I didn't then think, oh right, therefore violence is all right, as if that's how your mind works. It's so simplistic. It's so ludicrous. But there is this argument about if you use violence against your child, you're creating the violence of the world in the future. It's like, Jesus, what? Have you ever read a novel or watched a film or tried to understand how the world actually operates? To think that we're kind of like some sort of amoeba-like creature that just reacts in this way just doesn't make any sense. But fundamentally, if you have moral objections to these things, fine. But we're meant to live in a free society where we're able to have arguments about these things.
It's the wine.
Is it the football? So that's, I suppose that's a concern I have, is once this becomes criminalised, it's parents. I worry that parents will be frightened about teachers, right? Because are teachers going to then tell the police or tell social work? Right? Is that what's going to happen if they find out about smartphones? So I just think we need to be a little bit more generous with people and come to a conclusion that we shouldn't be making everything criminal because we don't agree with it. We can argue about it and we can challenge people about it, and if you want to have a campaign against it, that's fine, and it's interesting, you might make some useful points, but to make it criminal is criminal. I mean, it really is authoritarian to be arrested. For doing that, and that's a criminal offence, is utterly insane.
Okay, something's been eating me for about 20 minutes, and it's the idea that somehow it's all right to do things to human beings who are at a lower stage of cognitive development, which it wouldn't be all right to do if they were more advanced. So nobody's saying it's all right to hit adults, but we are saying it's sometimes all right to, those who are saying it's sometimes all right to hit children. There's a way of thinking about this, which is to stop thinking about the future and just think about now, right? And in the now, say you have a child with a life-limiting illness who has a lifespan of 3 or 4. By the lights of that argument, there could be nothing conceivably wrong with it. Why? Because there's nothing wrong with it in principle, and the only possible way in which it would be wrong is if it turned that person into a villain when it's wrong. I think there might well be something wrong with it in principle. And it's the same reason that it's wrong to hit your cat, or to kick your dog around, or to bully people with cognitive disabilities, or to do things to people because their situation is that they have lower cognitive abilities and they can't do anything back. And that's a curious argument, and I think I really don't like, as you probably gathered, my whole line here is actually not to sensationalise this stuff, because I think there are some really difficult issues here. But my worry there is that that kind of argument could lead to a defence of a certain kind of treatment of people because they are less able to respond to it in a way which you wouldn't like, which is deeply troubling. And that's actually quite separate from some of the earlier questions, because I think a lot of this debate happens in terms of child development. So it's like, does it or does it not have a detrimental effect on the person that this person becomes, or the future version of this person? What if they don't become a future person? What if this is it? What if this is their life as it is? What if they don't develop any further? It seems to me that there's quite a deep question there about whether it could be alright to hit them. And that's actually just as worth asking as having a big debate about whether or not smacking is ultimately socially beneficial in terms of the evidence we become.
I think, Gideon, there's a fundamental contradiction in your premises from where you started your argument and the logic that you're pursuing, which also speaks to the comment made by the chap at the back, I'm sorry, so I don't know your name either, about the distinction between adulthood and childhood. Because actually, the whole possibility for having children at school, having children not at work, i.e. childhood, is predicated on a really fundamentally important process that human societies have managed to go through creating distinctions between adulthood and childhood. I mean, that's what we did. And it was on that basis that we decided to exclude children from areas of society which we define as adult. You know, that's why we don't send the kids down the mines anymore. That's why we have them in full-time education. It's why we did all of these things, and that was one of the great gains of the movement out of the 19th century into the 20th century. And what that speaks to is and it's, you know, it was a difficult process, and there's all sorts of deficits with the way it's gone, but I see it as a absolutely great gain of a humanistic, progressive impulse to want to create a boundary and to define a differentiation between what it means to be an adult and what it means to be a child. And that differentiation is based on an understanding that children are different to adults, and that what they need from adults is a concern with their welfare and a concern with how we develop them and bring them into our world so that they can go beyond it, right? Little children, you know, that's what you do. When you educate children, you'll bring them into our world. We have a world. Adult, you know, and to disregard that, to disregard the fantastic achievements of human society to date, to just say they count for nothing, I mean, you might as well just give up being a teacher, right? If you don't think we've learnt anything that we want to bequeath to them so that they can go beyond us, then I just think that's completely irresponsible. And I think that's what we're doing as adults. And if we don't uphold that idea of adulthood and take it seriously and see ourselves as responsible in relation to them, then we can't bring about a proper future. And I think having proper differentiations in the way we then think about children and the development of their moral capacities is absolutely central. And I think that the way in which international agencies then going down into governments doing completely the wrong thing in the way that they are now, construing this as a battle of rights between parents on the one hand and children on the other, completely both misunderstands and then reconstructs what we have here and what we need to do in a completely wrong way. Because this is not a battle between parents as adults and our children, right? This is a responsible process through which we are trying to bring them up and make them into full-rounded human beings. So I'm just going to end with Hegel, which is what I wanted to say at the beginning, which is where Diana Baumbrin begins one of her brilliant articles. I'd really recommend people to do this. And he, all those years ago, was already objecting to the idea of seeing this as a question of rights. And he put it this way: the right of the parents over the wishes of their children is determined by the object in view, discipline and education. And he then goes on to argue is the punishment of children does not aim at justice as such. So the whole idea of the construct of this is to do with rights and the criminal law is completely alien and has no place in this relation. He said the aim is more subjective and moral in character. That is, to deter them from exercising a freedom still in the toils of nature. That's just responding to their unschooled emotions, having tantrums, not being able to control themselves, that we need to do something about that in order to lift the universal into their consciousness and will, to make them adults who can act with free will, have a consciousness and act on the world to make it a better place. Now, I think that's what we should aspire to. I honestly think that's what we need to be doing. And that's what it means to take adult responsibility seriously. And I think collapsing that by saying children are no different to us, that we shouldn't ever treat them any differently to us, it is just a sheer abandonment of adult responsibility.
Okay, so that's all the time that we have, and as is always the case, we raise more questions than we can solve, but I think that was a nice way to round out the discussion about it's not just about particular things that parents do to children, but it's also about what we as a society kind of value and what we want to pass on to the next generation, which is what I think some of this is about. And maybe it's the place for the law to step in and make sure that people are actually doing that, because a lot of the time they don't. Or perhaps that's something that should be a moral question that's best left to free individuals in society. So I want to give my panel and yourselves a round of applause. So thank you very much. Can I ask questions? There's some materials over there if you'd like to have a look as well.